Veterans sacrifice everything for their country, but who truly looks out for them? What Donald Trump did inside Walter Reed National Military Medical Center left even the doctors stunned. No one saw it coming. There were no reporters, no camera crews, no social media announcements, just a convoy of black SUVs arriving at the hospital on a quiet, overcast Tuesday afternoon. Inside, the medical staff moved with urgency, caring for soldiers, men and women who had given parts of themselves, sometimes literally, in service to their nation. Most had no idea who had just entered. Trump walked in without his usual fanfare, no press conferences, no flashing lights, his energy subdued, his movements careful, as if the weight of the moment had settled on him. He wasn't here for politics, this was personal. Dr. Samuel Richards, the hospital director, greeted him with a firm handshake and led him through the corridors. "They don't know you're coming," he said quietly. "It might be better that way." Trump simply nodded, his eyes fixed ahead. Down the hall, the faint squeak of a wheelchair broke the silence as a soldier missing both legs maneuvered himself into a common room, while another sat with his head down, staring at his phone, the weight of his reality pressing down like an invisible force. Trump absorbed it all. This wasn't just another visit, and it wasn't about publicity. It was something deeper. But the moment that would leave everyone speechless was still to come. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and fresh linens, the soft hum of medical monitors blending with the occasional muffled conversation. Trump walked past open doors, catching glimpses of men and women whose bodies bore the price of war, missing limbs, burned scars, and eyes filled with stories too heavy for words. Some patients recognized him, a few sat up straighter, while others hesitated, unsure whether to salute or shake his hand. One soldier, his left arm in a sling, gave a thumbs up, and Trump returned the gesture, a small but genuine exchange. He stopped at the door of Sergeant Daniel Reyes, a 29-year-old who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and lost his right leg below the knee, though his spirit remained unshaken. "Didn't expect to see you here, sir," Reyes said, adjusting himself in bed. Trump pulled up a chair. "Didn't expect to be here," he admitted, "but I heard about you guys and figured I should see for myself." Reyes smirked. "They keeping you on a short leash, or do you actually get to walk around?" Trump chuckled. "They'll let me walk around as long as I don't cause trouble." For the next few minutes, they talked, the weight of war momentarily set aside. They didn't talk about politics or policies, just life. Reyes cracked jokes about the hospital food and how he planned to outrun every physical therapist who tried to push him through another round of rehab. For a moment, it felt normal. As Trump stood to leave, he asked, "You need anything?" Reyes hesitated, then shook his head. "Just keep looking out for guys like us." Trump gave him a firm pat on the shoulder before stepping back into the hallway. But everything changed when he reached the last room on the right. The hospital was no longer quiet, word had spread. Some patients wheeled themselves into the hall, while others propped themselves up in bed, peering through open doors. Whatever they thought of him, good, bad, or indifferent, one thing was certain: Donald Trump was here, and he wasn't rushing through like a politician on a schedule. He was stopping, listening, and in one room at a time, making sure they knew they weren't forgotten. He sat beside Private First Class Jordan Tate, a 22-year-old with a fresh bandage wrapped around his head. Shrapnel had taken part of his hearing, and his speech was slow and deliberate. "I had plans," Tate said, his voice softer than the beeping machines behind him. "College, maybe law school." He exhaled, staring at his hands. "Now, I don't know." Trump leaned in slightly. "You're young, you've got time to figure it out." Tate let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, but what if I can't?" For a moment, Trump said nothing. Then, in a rare moment of direct honesty, he admitted, "I don't have that answer. But I know one thing: you don't quit. You don't let this decide the rest of your life." Tate nodded, his expression unreadable. "Guess I don't have a choice, huh?" Trump stood and offered a handshake. "You do, and you'll make the right one." The next room was different. Lieutenant Mark Holloway, a 41-year-old Army Ranger, sat upright, his wife and 2 kids by his side. A long scar ran from Lieutenant Mark Holloway's temple to his jawline, a permanent reminder of battles fought. His uniform hung neatly in the corner, the name tag still pinned in place. His wife, Karen, offered a polite smile. "Didn't expect visitors today." Trump glanced at their kids, maybe 6 and 8 years old, who stared at him with wide eyes, unsure whether to be excited or afraid. "What happened to him?" the youngest asked, pointing to their father's scar. Before anyone could answer, Holloway ruffled his son's hair. "Something that was worth it." Trump watched the exchange, something shifting in his expression. He shook Holloway's hand firmly. "Hell of a family you've got here." Karen nodded. "They're why he fought." Trump turned to leave but hesitated, standing there a moment longer. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, "Make sure they know what he did for them." Karen smiled, but the weight of those words lingered long after he left the room. But it was in the next room that Trump came face to face with something that stopped him in his tracks. The room felt smaller than the others, with fewer machines, fewer visitors, and an unmistakable sense of finality in the air. A lone Marine sat in a hospital bed, staring at the television without really watching it, the sound muted. Trump stepped inside, but the young man, maybe 24 or 25, with a short buzz cut and a strong jawline, didn't react right away. He looked like the kind of guy who had probably run 5 miles before sunrise every day for years. Now, he wasn't moving at all. "Mind if I sit?" Trump asked. The Marine's eyes flickered toward him, then back to the screen. He shrugged. "It's a free country." Trump pulled up a chair. "What's your name?" "Corporal Jake Lawson," he said flatly, like he'd answered that question 100 times in the past few weeks. Trump glanced at the wheelchair parked near the foot of the bed. "How long have you been here?" Lawson sighed, rubbing his temple. "Since the blast." 3 months. A beat of silence. "Doctors say you're stuck in that chair?" Lawson nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah. They say the spine's done. No more running, no more jumping. Just this." He motioned toward the chair, his voice laced with a bitterness sharp enough to cut steel. "And after rehab? Maybe a desk job. Maybe nothing." He let out a dry laugh. "Bet that makes a great headline, huh? Marine gives everything, gets nothing." Trump sat back, steadying him, taking in the weight of those words. He wasn't here to argue, to offer empty encouragement, or to tell him to stay positive. This kid had lost something no speech could bring back. After a moment, Trump said, "I won't pretend to know what that feels like. But I'll tell you this, you're not forgotten." Lawson scoffed. "That's what they all say." Trump didn't blink. "Because it's true." Something in the Marine's face shifted, his hands curled into fists on his lap, his breath unsteady. "You know what I hate," he muttered. "I hate that I'd do it again. That if I had to, I'd take the same damn risk." Trump stayed silent, letting the words settle. "I didn't do it for politicians," Lawson continued. "Didn't do it for medals or handshakes. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And now," he swallowed hard, "now I'm just another guy in a wheelchair. Another guy waiting to be forgotten." For the first time since stepping into the room, Trump leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fully present in the weight of the moment. His voice dropped lower, steady. "You're not just another guy," he said. "You're the reason this country still has men willing to fight." Lawson clenched his jaw, looking away. Trump exhaled, tapping his fingers against the armrest. Then, in a quiet but certain voice, he said, "I want to do something for you." Lawson frowned. "Like what?" Trump stood up, locking eyes with him. "Something no one else will." What he said next left the entire hospital in stunned silence. The room went quiet, even the hum of the medical monitors seemed distant. Trump stood there, his hands resting on the back of the chair he had just been sitting in. Corporal Jake Lawson stared at him, expecting the usual words, the generic promises, the "we'll take care of you" speech that meant nothing outside the walls of the hospital. But that's not what happened. Trump exhaled through his nose, his eyes sharp with something Lawson couldn't quite place. "I'm setting up a foundation in your name," he said. "Not a charity. Not a PR move. A real damn foundation for men like you, guys who come back and get stuck in a system that forgets about them." Lawson's brow furrowed. "What? You're not going to rot in this hospital. You're not going to spend the next 10 years wondering if anyone remembers what you gave," Trump said. "I'm making sure you and every other veteran in your position get the rehab, the support, and the future you deserve." Lawson blinked, his hands, which had been clenched into fists, loosening slightly. You're serious?" he asked. Trump didn't waver. "Dead serious." The door had been slightly open, and now a handful of nurses stood just outside, frozen in place. A doctor leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Even the Marine in the next bed, who had been pretending not to listen, turned his head slightly. "Sir?" Lawson started, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. For the first time since he'd woken up in the hospital, he felt something unfamiliar, a crack in the numbness. "Hope." Trump reached out and clasped Lawson's hand, squeezing it firmly. "This isn't for the cameras. This isn't for politics. This is because I can, and because you damn well earned it." Lawson swallowed hard, his throat tight. From the hallway, someone whispered, "Did he just say what I think he said?" In that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, but in every person who heard it. For a few seconds, no one moved. The air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. Even the usual background noise of the hospital, the distant hum of footsteps, the soft murmur of conversations, seemed to fade. One of the nurses outside the door exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath. Another exchanged wide-eyed glances with a colleague. The doctor, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened up, but all eyes were on Corporal Jake Lawson. He wasn't the kind of man who cried easily. The Marines had hardened him, taught him to bury his emotions deep. Yet here he was, sitting in that hospital bed, blinking rapidly, his throat working to push down whatever was rising inside him. His fingers tightened around Trump's hand, gripping it with a strength that defied his injuries. "I don't," he stopped, shook his head, then tried again. "I don't know what to say." Trump gave a small nod. "Then don't say anything. Just get better." The doctor finally spoke. "Mr. Trump, this is not what I expected today." His voice was careful, controlled, but there was something in his expression, something close to admiration. Trump turned toward him. "What do you need to make this happen?" The doctor hesitated, glancing at Lawson before answering. "Rehab. Specialized therapy. Long-term care that the VA doesn't always cover. We do what we can, but it's never enough." Trump's response was immediate. "Then I'll cover what they don't." The words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. A younger Marine in the next bed, who had been pretending not to listen, turned his head slightly. His face, still lined with healing burns, let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered. "Guess I should have asked for a Ferrari." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but the weight of what had just happened remained. Outside the room, a small crowd had gathered, nurses, doctors, a few hospital staff. Some whispered to each other, while others just stood there, stunned. One nurse in her 50s pressed a hand to her chest. "I've worked here for 20 years, she murmured. "I've never seen anything like this." A few feet away, a soldier in a wheelchair wiped at his face discreetly, turning away. Trump straightened up. "Make sure he gets what he needs," he said to the doctor. "And not just him, every soldier like him." The doctor nodded slowly. "We'll do our part." "But, Mr. Trump, are you sure about this?" Trump's gaze flickered back to Lawson. The young Marine sat there, still gripping the sheets as if afraid to let go of the moment. "I don't make promises I don't keep," Trump replied. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room. He didn't look back as he walked down the hall. The weight of the moment followed him, but he carried it like a man used to expectations, used to the eyes watching his every move. But this wasn't a campaign event. There were no flashing cameras, no press pool waiting to spin the story. It was just the quiet shuffle of hospital staff, the murmured voices of recovering soldiers, and the scent of antiseptic hanging in the air. The nurses and doctors who had overheard the exchange didn't stop him, but their expressions spoke volumes. Some looked stunned, others just stared as if trying to process what had just happened. As he reached the hospital's main corridor, he passed a Vietnam veteran sitting in a wheelchair near the window. The old soldier had deep lines carved into his face, his hair thin but still holding streaks of its original dark brown. His hands rested on his knees, calloused and worn. "Mr. President," the man rasped, stopping Trump mid-step. Trump turned, and the veteran studied him for a long moment, then nodded, not in admiration or blind loyalty, but in understanding. "They won't forget this." Trump held his gaze for a second, then simply said, "Good." And that was it. No speech, no grand farewell. He pushed open the door and stepped into the cold afternoon air, his security detail falling in behind him. A hospital worker near the entrance muttered under his breath, "Did that really just happen?" But back inside, in that hospital room, Corporal Jake Lawson just sat there, staring at the ceiling, gripping the sheets like he was holding on to something that, for the first time in a long time, felt real. The news never covered it. There were no headlines, no viral clips, no commentators dissecting every word. But in the quiet halls of Walter Reed, something had changed. The doctors whispered about it between shifts. The nurses who had seen it firsthand carried the moment with them. And the soldiers, the ones who had spent weeks, months, even years feeling like forgotten relics, felt something they hadn't in a long time: acknowledgement. For Corporal Jake Lawson, life didn't suddenly become easy, but in that moment, something shifted. He still had long months of rehab ahead of him, still had moments when he stared at his motionless legs and felt the frustration creep back in, but he wasn't alone. The foundation Trump had promised, it was real. Within weeks, it began to take shape, funding specialized rehab programs, offering career training, and ensuring that men like Lawson had more than just a folded flag and a list of benefits that barely covered the cost of living. And it didn't stop there. Other veterans who had overheard that conversation started talking. Stories came out, stories of men and women who had given everything and gotten little in return. The ripple effect reached beyond Walter Reed, beyond Washington, beyond politics itself. Because at its core, this wasn't about policies or party lines, it was about something much simpler, a promise kept. And maybe that's the real lesson here: words are easy, speeches are rehearsed, but when a man follows through on a promise, that's when something truly changes. When he looks someone in the eye and says, "You're not forgotten," and then proves it, that's what really matters. Maybe we don't need more grand gestures. Maybe we don't need more empty promises. What we need is more action, more moments that remind us that behind every uniform is a person, someone who gave up more than most of us will ever understand. And maybe, just maybe, it's our job to make sure they never have to wonder if it was worth it. If you believe the sacrifices of these men and women should never be forgotten, take a moment to share this story and keep their names alive. Because at the end of the day, a nation is only as strong as the way it treats those who fought for it.